Now, if I said to you the names of Charles Darwin or Carl Jung or Sigmund Freud, then you would probably realise that I was talking about some fairly eminent scientists whose work had contributed significantly to our understanding of human nature and really what it means to be alive. And then if I said to you that I was going to give you the opportunity to see one of those great psychologists and researchers in real life, I'm sure that you would jump at the chance. Well, I am thrilled to say that that is exactly what is about to happen. Richard Ryan is one of the most eminent psychologists in the world today. The impact of his work is immeasurable. The theory that he's about to speak to you about today is it's called self-determination theory. And when I was researching his work, Google Scholar had cited one of the books he's written 30,000 times. Words cannot express how extraordinary it is that he's here to speak to us today. So please welcome him to the stage.
Well, thank you very much, and thank you for that wonderfully kind introduction. Really happy to be here and see so many happy faces today. My name is Richard Ryan, and I'm a clinical psychologist, psychotherapist, and a motivation researcher. And I've been doing motivation research for a very long time. Let me just put this back for a second. I want to say that self-determination theory is really a body of work done by a whole community of people across the globe, and it's led to a lot of research and a lot of evidence-based interventions in organizations, in clinics, in schools, and in families. And I'm really happy to be a part of that movement as it's occurred. And it's been disseminated in a lot of popular books of recent times in many different fields. And clearly in this 15-minute talk, I'm not going to be able to cover a lot of self-determination theory. And one of the things I just wanted to say right from the outset is to give you an apology. Most people, when they think of a motivation researcher who's going to speak, they think about motivational speakers. They think, I'm going to say something exciting, inspire you for the next few days. You'll sit on the edge of your seats. Maybe some of you could walk on some hot coals. But this is more my style. I'm a numbers person, a scientist. I kind of care about what the truth is about the various formulations we have about what brings us to happiness. And I also want to uncover the myths that we also have. And that brings me to the topic that I want to have in today's discussion, which is just about the connection between these two things, which is life goals and happiness. And we all have some life goals. Some of us aspire to be rich and famous. Some of us aspire to be givers to our community. And one of the things that we think very much in self-determination theory is not all life goals pay off with the promise that's offered. So people pursue a lot of life goals, and in pursuing them, they don't get their basic psychological needs fulfilled. And the result of that is they don't get the happiness they hoped for. Whereas other life goals seem to have a greater payoff, and that's what I'd like to discuss just a bit. But I want to say our work in this area is not original. This question about what kind of life goals, what kind of aspirations we have and its relationship to happiness goes way back to ancient times, and in particular the work of Aristotle and his concept of eudaimonia. Eudaimonia is roughly translated as living well or really flourishing, and Aristotle argued that when you have eudaimonia, you're living a life of virtue and of excellence. You're pursuing the things that are really intrinsically worthwhile. And he thought most of the people around him at the time didn't get it. In fact, he says here that to judge from their lives, most people, and he says he are the most vulgar, seem to suppose it to be pleasure, and therefore they favor a life of consumption. And he didn't agree that this was the right way to go in life. He said, in fact, that the people who are happy are those who've cultivated their character and their mind, and they've kept the acquisition of external goods to moderate limits. But people who are unhappy, and here I quote him again, are those who've managed to acquire more external goods than they can possibly use, but they're lacking in the goods of the soul. And I can't read that second statement without thinking a lot about my own American culture and how much it actually describes so many people within my culture, and now in my 4th year here in Australia, to see that being the same for many here too. Now, this was Aristotle's position. It was really an empirical position, not a philosophical one. He was saying that the full life, the happy life, would be one where people are pursuing virtues and developing their potentialities to the fullest. But not all philosophers have agreed with him, and we have some modern philosophers who strongly disagreed. Here's one of them. He's a very, very, very prolific author, and has some amazing titles like "Have I Told You How Wealthy I Am?" I think he has. But not to give him all the credit for that position. Really, we have a lot of cultural messages that are in the same direction. We're told a lot that if we're going to be happy if we consume the right things, we have the right possessions, if we pursue successful careers. These are going to be the roadways to a good life. And so, we have a question here, a debate. Who's right in this? Is it Aristotle or is it Trump? And I want to point out that, despite their philosophical differences, you do notice the same hairstyle, right? So we wanted to address this question empirically as researchers, and this is work I really started with Tim Kasser when he was a student at Rochester. And we started this work just by going around to all kinds of groups and asking people, what are your life goals? What are you aspiring to in this life? And there were many different answers to that question, but we found that there were a couple of groups of life goals that kind of went together. And one was a group of goals we called extrinsic life goals. And these are things like making money, getting power, becoming popular or famous, having the right image, being attractive in some ways. People who like one of these aspirations typically like the others. They kind of hang together strongly. And another group that we found, though, were people who, when you asked them what they wanted to do with their lives, they said, I want loving relationships, or I want to really give to my community, or I want to keep growing and learning. And those things also tended to hang together, so people would tend to favor either intrinsic or extrinsic life goals. And then we would survey people after asking them about their life goals, about their mental health or their wellness. I just want to show you one of our early studies. This is just correlation of results. And this was urban adults. We were going door to door and surveying people and asking them about their life goals and then saying, would you fill out this mental health or physical health survey? And we found pretty dramatic results, which is people who were focused on giving to their communities, on relationships, on personal growth, were happier people. They rated themselves as more self-actualized, as having more vitality. They had fewer symptoms of depression, and they had fewer physical complaints like headaches, stomach aches, backaches, typical symptoms of stress. And the opposite was true, of course, for people who were emphasizing extrinsic life goals. They were showing more of these signs of depression, more of these symptoms of stress, and less vitality and energy on a day-to-day basis. This early research of ours, we did several studies of this sort using different methodologies, and we found that it kept replicating. And there was a New York Times article that wrote about this, calling it the dark side of the American dream. But it's really not just an American issue. We've done now this same research in over 30 nations in the world, and we find the same pattern across all these different cultural groups. Those people who are favoring intrinsic goals in terms of what they're emphasizing as life goals, they turned out to be happier people with fewer mental health problems or issues. And this also is true across ages. We've actually done work with late elementary school children, with teenagers, with working adults, and with retired individuals. And in all these groups, we still get the same pattern of results. Even in occupations where you think the emphasis should be on extrinsic goals, for instance, in business schools, those business students who are more prone to giving to their community or forming loving relationships turn out to be happier business students as well. So some people questioned, maybe that's not about just the goals that you have, but it's about attainment. So for instance, maybe it's just harder to get rich or it's harder to get famous. And if you got those things, of course you'd be happy. And here I've put up a few rich, famous people on this slide here. And as we know, not all of them are happy people. Some of them might be. And actually what we found in our research is that in life, when people attain extrinsic goals, when they say, I've made that money, I've gotten that fame, I've achieved those things that are part of that goal, it doesn't necessarily make them any happier unless they've also had high attainment in intrinsic goals, unless they've established loving families and they've given a lot back to their communities. But people who have given to their communities and people who have loving relationships, if they've attained those things, they're happy whether or not they have exceeded in the extrinsic sphere. So it turns out that success at the intrinsic goals of life is the necessary and sufficient condition for happiness. Now, we've done this, studied this in lots of different ways, but I'll just tell you one more study we did, which was with university students after they graduated. So a year after they graduated, we followed these people and we asked them, now in your early career stage of life, what are you going after? What are your aspirations? And of course, we had groups who were saying, I want to make money, become famous, get powerful. And we had groups who said, I want to give to my community, I want to form a loving family. And what was really interesting in this research is these people who had been able to graduate from universities pretty much got what they wished for. Over the next 2 years when we were following them, people who wanted money made more money. People who wanted to get more power got more status. But people who wanted to give to their community also gave to their communities and formed more loving relationships. So both groups attained what they were after, but they had very different results in terms of happiness. So in terms of what the change from the baseline when we measured these people who were pursuing intrinsic goals and attaining them were actually getting happier, they had more well-being, and they had fewer signs of ill-being over those 2 years of time. Whereas people who were pursuing extrinsic goals and attaining them, and actually succeeding at them, showed no increase in their happiness or their well-being, but they did show an increase in symptoms of depression, of anxiety, and other forms of ill-being. So I just want to give you one more example of this, and this is not my research, but it was done by Sheldon and Krieger's a lawyer who's become enamored with self-determination theory, and so he was a big part of this research. And in this research, they surveyed lawyers around the United States. I think they had 7,000 lawyers in their sample. And they separated them into 3 groups. One group was a group of lawyers who they called social advocacy lawyers. And these are people who went into law with some intrinsic goals in their hearts. They wanted to work for the protection of the environment, or they wanted to work against social injustice or provide services for the poor. And they formed, about a third of this large group of lawyers. Another group, though, was what they called the money lawyers, and this was a large group of lawyers who really went into the profession because they were going to make the big bucks. And they tended to work for hedge funds, or they worked for corporations, probably defending against the environmental regulations that the social advocacy lawyers were working for, but they were in there for the money. And they got, like our college graduates, they got what they wished for. This group of money lawyers was substantially better off financially than the social advocacy lawyers. But remarkably, when it came to the richness of happiness, the richness of well-being, it is the social advocacy people who were significantly higher. Not controlling for income, because if you control for income, it would only exaggerate that result greatly. So they were unhappy, and kind of a sad part of the money lawyer scenario is that in their unhappiness on a day-to-day basis, because they're not pursuing something that they have high purpose for or high mission, they felt a lot of stress and a lot of pressure, and the way they tried to solve that problem is buy more things. Maybe another vacation home, maybe a second Mercedes. Maybe that will now make me happy, but that's a vicious cycle that added nothing to their overall happiness. So this pattern is a pretty clear pattern to this point, and sadly it describes a lot of cultural movements too. And so I mentioned here a study by Jeannie Twang and her associates where they were looking at a 70-year span of entering college students and their mental health in the United States. And they found a disturbing trend. They found that entering college students over the 70-year period were increasing in their reports of antisocial attitudes and behaviors, and they were increasing in their signs of depression over time. And Twenge and her colleagues tried to see what could account for this linear trend towards more psychopathology, and what they found is that it wasn't accounted for by changes in religion, it wasn't accounted for by changes in family structure, it was not predicted by economic trends within the society. Instead, they concluded the following, because they saw it was really a change in values. They said it fit a cultural pattern of change toward extrinsic rather than intrinsic goals. And more specifically, they said, over time, American cultures increasingly shifted to an environment where more and more young people experience poor mental health and psychopathology, possibly due to an increased focus on money, appearance, and status, rather than community and relationships. This is even true in our retirement and old age. This is a study that was done in Belgium by Maarten van Stinkist and Van Heil of people who were 75 years on average in age. And they asked them, what have you attained in your life? And they took their extrinsic attainments, and the extrinsic attainments turned out, as you can see here, not to be associated with well-being, where people saying I had intrinsic attainments was robustly associated with greater well-being. But more than that, too, people who had attained extrinsic outcomes in life, this didn't add to their sense of ego integrity. It didn't add to their, it didn't take away from their despair. And you can see here that it was associated with less acceptance of death that's coming. So even in old age, when we look back on what's been important in our lives, we see that it's really more about the intrinsic than extrinsic goals. So, you know, this has been, I know this is a happiness conference, and I'm giving a kind of depressing message. And I apologize for that. The message has been so far that pursuing wealth, money, and fame won't get you there. Pursuing love, pursuing community will. And so when we get to what you should do, I just want to, in my last couple minutes here, emphasize a couple things. One is the intrinsic value of personal growth. When we think about that, we think about pursuing the things that are really meaningful, both in your vocations and your avocations, like the social advocacy lawyers, going for something that has a purpose. You're always also, I think, is looking for novelty and always wanting to learn. Auntie Rhonda, who was in the green room in the back, she said, take a new pathway every day. I really like that idea. That's adding to personal growth. And when you do that personal growth, of course, it's adding to your basic psychological needs satisfaction, and this will increase your wellness overall. Secondly, relationships is another intrinsic goal, and this is the most universally rated important goal in all the cultures we study, and really, it's the most important contributor to overall life satisfaction. And I can't emphasize this enough, how strong the results are in all of our data for giving to your community and how it fosters well-being. We've done lots of studies of helping, lots of studies of contributing, and why it makes people happy or in what ways it does. And when you give to others, you're doing several things that satisfy what in SDT we call basic psychological needs. When you're giving to others and helping others, that helps you to feel effectiveness or competence in the world. It helps you connect with other people and feel that relatedness, and it also fulfills that sense of mission and value, so important to our sense of autonomy. So this turns out to be a very important way to happiness, so to speak, and it's no wonder to us then that people like to do good, because when they do good, not because they're trying to do this, but they also turn out to do well for themselves. So, in summary, I just want to say that, it's been a long debate, thousands of years now, and, we see that when it comes down to the data anyway, some ancient truths are still holding true, which is it's the intrinsic goals that really matter. Thank you very much.